Okay. Hello. What a day, what a week, what a month, what a year. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me an hour earlier. I apologize for having to move the time. And in typical fashion, same thing happened last week, by the way. I had to cancel last week and I had to move today. And both times, the thing that I was changing for or canceling for has changed at the last moment. Today's because of one of our family members has tested positive for COVID. Not one who is living in the house at the moment, but one of our Northern California exiles who have moved up to Northern California, but were here within the last 2 weeks. So today, after everything had been set up and after I had informed all you nice people that I was going to be reading early tonight so we could go out and do something later this evening, that has now been shot to pieces. But, and everything else, like I said, what a month, what a summer. It's been tough. We've got one family grandmother. One of Deb's and my mother's is in the hospital with pneumonia. One of our grandmothers has had a positive test for COVID. Another one of our kids, as I mentioned, has just had a positive test for COVID. Meanwhile, everything else goes on as usual. So forgive me if I seem a trifle distracted. I am. However, I am very grateful that those of you who are here have allowed me to change the time. I apologize, especially since it now turned out to not matter because, as I said, we can't go out until we've made sure that, we are all not COVID positive and various other things. So, anyway, nice to see you. Anyway, all of you, my darlings, my hamburgers, and various other delicacies. Lovely to have you with me. I'm going to start reading in a moment. I'm trying to think if there's anything else vital that anybody needs to be informed about other than the fact that it's totally nuts here at the moment, with all kinds of things going on, as mentioned, and plus the added thing of various people in health distress, which is adding to the confusion and the complexity and the scheduling issues and the everything else. I don't mean to make it sound like my being concerned is more about scheduling issues than anything else. Fortunately, so far, it seems like everybody is going to be okay and will recover from the various things, although still some concerns here and there. Of course, that is the primary concern, but just that it's adding to the complexity of everything. I really didn't want any more complexity. We're already knee deep in complications of various kinds because of things going on with the house and the dogs and the this and the that. I sound like Sid Dithers from the old SCTV show. And the this and the that and all the things. Anyway, so... But that's just how it is. That's just the fact. And I know everybody out there has probably had to go through things like this at some time or another. And so I am grateful you stuck with me. Those of you who did, yeah, we've got most of the group here, it looks like. And those who are seeing this after in a recorded version and couldn't make it because of the change of time, again, I apologize. I intended to be only for this week. And as I said, fate conspired for the second week in a row to make it pointless. But, fate and I are old pals, and we'll work something out between us. Anyway, anything else to talk to you about? No, I'm deep. When I find time to work, which has been a little difficult the last few days, I'm deep into the ending of Navigator's Children. Which, as I was mentioning to the folks last night when I was reading, is particularly pointed at the moment because there's sort of two major climactic peaks at the end of the story. And I've just gotten through the first one, which I've been sort of planning for years and years and years. I mean, I knew most of the details of it. You kind of have to when you're writing multi-volume stories. You have to have at least a good idea of what's going to happen at the end. Not necessarily everything or in exactly what order, but you have to be able to foreshadow and to set things up and to put things, especially put things into the early volumes so that it doesn't seem like you just had to come up with a new ending at the last minute. So that part I was prepared for and kind of, made it all work, got through it and got into the next bit, which is the kind of the trough after the peak, where various things get explained and people meet up that haven't met before, haven't seen each other for a long time and all that. And I suddenly realized as I got to it that I had no idea how any of that was going to work. Because of course, some of the stuff you just can't plan ahead of time. You don't literally know the physical positions, the geography, or, in the case of the folks who are around for the important events, like the actual physical positions of people. So what order things happen in and who does what when, you can't always plan out ahead of time. You can know the general lineaments of what you're doing, but you can't necessarily know everything. And to try would be foolish. So you have to be willing to, at that point, to be a bit of what George R.R. Martin refers to as a pantser. And those of you who don't recognize that definition, George was talking about there being, as far as he could see, there were two different kinds of writers. There are architects who plan everything, and there are seat of the pants writers who just kind of go and see what happens. And I am far more of an architect than a seat of the pantser. But even I know that you cannot architect everything, because especially in a big book, and this is now the ending of the largest story I have ever written, and probably most writers have ever written, when I consider that this is basically continues on from all of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and The Burning Man, and the two short novels that have both come out, The Heart of What Was Lost and Brothers of the Wind, and all 4 volumes now, which I'm working on the final one, all 4 volumes of the new series. So that's well over 2 million words of stuff that is all now coming together. You cannot plan all that stuff ahead of time. Some of it you have to take as you go. So no matter how much of an architect you want to be as a writer, or I want to be as a writer, there are points in time, and this is one of them, where you have to be seat of the pants. You have to just say, okay, now what's in front of me? How do I make it work? So that's what I'm doing at the moment. So just to kind of give you a heads up on what I'm working on. And it's not a complaint, I hasten to say. It's nice to have different kinds of writing to do, to plan things, but also to have serendipity. And serendipity can be wonderful, just things that happen that you hadn't expected. Serendipity, as I've often said, can also be horrifying. When you have a plan for something and you get to that point and you realize that the characters or the situation have changed so much during the couple of years or whatever you've been writing, that, or in my case, more like 8 years that I've been writing this, that certain things are no longer going to work. They're just not valid. Sometimes the joke I make is that you have a character and you've set them up for an entire long series to jump in front of the main character and take a spear, and therefore the main character survives and the minor character bravely sacrifices themselves. And then you get to that point in the manuscript and you realize that since you invented that minor character, again, that you invented precisely for the reason that you need somebody who will be with the protagonist and take that spear, that the character has developed over the course of writing the story until they're clearly the kind of person who would just go, no way, dude, I'm not doing that. That's not me. Which is, as I always joke, or it's not really a joke, it's really the truth. This is one of the reasons you have that I write a lot of other characters, so that I can always grab some other poor sucker who's standing around and going, guess what? You get to take the spear. And while the lucky honoree is going, huh? I can, in some cases, I can complete my dastardly plan. Sometimes you have to just throw the dastardly plan out too. That's one of the other parts of writing. As William Faulkner famously said, I believe in his 1920, whatever it was, Nobel Prize for Literature speech, he said, you have to be willing to kill your darlings. And this did not mean that writers should go and murder their families. This is not what Faulkner meant at all. What Faulkner meant is you cannot attach yourself to something beyond the point where you realize that it's not going to work in your storytelling. You may think, I have this wonderful thing, but sometimes you will get to that wonderful thing and realize it does not work. It doesn't work the way I planned it to work. And Faulkner is saying, you have to be willing to just say, no, sorry. It sounded great. I've been looking forward to writing that bit for years, but it's now not going to work. So, I have to be hard-hearted and toss it out and come up with something else. So that's the mode that I'm in at the moment. And again, not a complaint. It's part of the process. It would be boring if it was all one way or the other. It would certainly be boring if I was trying to be a complete architect and figure out everything before I started the story, because a lot of things in the books, really develop, especially these big complicated books where you're literally sometimes picking characters just to have a viewpoint on a certain plot line or in a certain geographic location. And then you get to know the characters, because I don't ever want to have a character who's just two-dimensional. I always want even minor characters to feel like when we're not looking at them, they are living their own life and they are the center of their own life. So no matter what you do, you are going to have changes that will come about while you are writing. And that's part of the process. And it gives a lot of warmth and complexity and the illusion of reality to these big stories, that these kind of seemingly random things continue to happen even in a very planned out environment, in a very planned out story. So long spiel by way of saying, that it's not a complaint. It's just it's not a bug. It's not a feature. It's a fact. That's how it is when you're writing big stories anyway, or long stories. And I definitely have a preponderance of long stories in my CV, my curriculum vitae, as we say. Anyway, so let me just run down the list here and say hello to everybody, and then I will start writing. So, Jerry, Mr. Unangst. Okay. Stuart says, Buenos nachos. And I say back to him, Buenos nachos a usted, señor. Or a tú. A ti. Yeah, a ti. And who else is here? Kelly, hello, good evening. Good to see you. Emily, hello, Tad. And Tad friends, says Emily. Had the most necessary time at Gen Con and then finally joined the COVID club. Oh, God, sorry to hear it. Been a miserable 2 weeks, but at least the asthma is holding back. Okay, fingers crossed. I'm really sorry to hear it. As I said, we've had a bunch of COVID diagnoses in the family just in the last couple of weeks. So we didn't think we were going to stay lucky forever, but you can always hope. Anyway, Claudia. Hello, Claudia. Good to see you. Jared. Hello. Good to see you. I'm doing fine personally at the moment, although I'm concerned for various others. And Deb is also the same. Deb and I, as far as we know, are both healthy. I'm going to take a COVID test later just to have a kind of an inkling of whether any of us got infected by the family member before they moved up north. So, but anyway, as far as I know, I'm fine. I feel fine. So we'll hope for the best, because I sure have a lot of work to do. Who else have I not said hello to yet? Tim, hello, greetings. Good to see you. It's been a rainy day in Eastern Ontario. I've been to Eastern Ontario, so I'm glad that you're curling up next to the glow of the screen and listening to, my book. If it's a good book, I'm glad. Becca, hello, Becca. Good to see you. Thank you for the kind words. And Jared, yes, you're right. That is altogether too much excitement. Alexis, hello, Alexis. I owe you a hello, probably also via some kind of electronic means, just to check in with you, but it may not happen right the moment because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, things are a little crazy at the moment. Chris, hello, hello. Good to see you. James Hooten says, woo! Winter, hello, Winter. Waves briefly, and I wave briefly back to you. Good to see you. Who else? Emily. Emily says something nice about Burning Man. Well, thank you, Emily. That is much appreciated. It's quite an old story now, but I really worked at it for a number of reasons, not least of which because I was sharing that anthology with a lot of very good writers. I don't normally get competitive in that way, where I'm like, oh, I have to outdo this or outdo that. But every now and then when I'm in an anthology where there are a lot of other fine writers, and there were, George R.R. Martin was in it, Neil was in it, I believe, and Ursula Le Guin, the late Ursula Le Guin, the late but fabulous writer Ursula Le Guin, who is a great favorite of mine and somebody I've always admired. So, as if anything, actually, I think a little Ursula Le Guinishness slipped into The Burning Man. So that was a story that I really wanted to have it work, and so it was important to me. So great, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Who have I not said hello to yet? James, yeah. I already said hello to James. Angie, hello, hello. Well, Angie, one thing is Angie says she always marvels how there aren't 500 people or more here. I don't worry about it. I'm not aggressively going out trying to market this. I mainly did it originally as a thing just during COVID, which unfortunately is still with us. Maybe someday if, as I said, I kind of change the focus of it and start doing something slightly different, then I will be more interested in like trying to market it and find new people, and trying to build an audience and get lots of YouTube likes or something. And that is kind of beyond my scope right at the moment. I'm just trying to do what I can do with other things. And this is more of a labor of love. So, this is people I've been reading to and talking to and hanging out with now for, over 2 years during the pandemic. So that's really been my only concern. But that's kind of the way things always are with me. I really probably should think more about the sort of commercial and brand building aspects of things. I guess my parents just didn't raise me right. Okay, who else have we got here that I haven't said hello to yet? Ray, excuse me, Ray Weatherford. Hello, Ray. Good to see you. Jeremy, Sunday already? My God, yes it is. Pierre, hello, hello. Good to see you. And I think that's everybody. So I'm going to start reading. Last night, we were reading chapter 8, I believe, and I think that's what we're still in the middle of. And among other things, it's chapter 9. Simon, A Smoke on the Wind. Chapter 9, Simon, and chapter 8, which was the previous chapter, which I also read from last night. That's why I'm confused. Chapter 8, Morganes took Simon and Jeremiah and a page named Isaac out into the Kinslaw to gather mushrooms, and they found the body of a man who had been killed, shot with arrows, or with an arrow. It had been there for quite some time, and we don't know what that means yet, but that's what they found. Now we're in chapter 9. It's called Smoke on the Wind, and what has just happened is that Simon has taken a kind of slightly forged letter from Dr. Morganes, and he and Jeremiah have gone to the Lord Constable Breugar and tried to get him to take them on as guardsmen or soldiers, and he has basically dismissed them, with great contempt and finality, like, go away, little boys, we're not interested in you. And that's where that part ended. So I am going to start from there. That was the end of the last section, and now I'm going to start a new section. There is something strange in the north wind today, thought his Grimner. Something that smells like an animal, or a storm about to happen, or both. Some scratchy thing that puts the hair on my neck right up. He rubbed his hands together as though the air were cold, which it was not, and pushed the sleeves of his light summer tunic, worn months early in this oddest of years, up over his corded old forearms. He went again to the doorway and looked out, feeling embarrassed that an old soldier like himself should be playing such stripling's games. Where is that damned Hernister man? Turning to pace again, he nearly tripped over a stack of writing boxes, instead catching a boot buckle in the bottommost of a small pyramid of parchment scrolls that hemmed in his confined walking space. Cursing roundly, he bent in time to keep the arrangement from toppling. Certainly the deserted room in the Hall of Records, emptied so that the writing priests could make their Elysia Mansa observances, was as good a place as could be found on short notice for a clandestine meeting. But why couldn't they leave enough room among their damned daubings for a grown man to move around? The door latch rattled. Duke Isgrimner, relieved of waiting at last, sprang forward. Instead of peering out cautiously, he flung the door open to find not two men, as expected, but one. "Praise Adon you're here, Eolair," he barked. "Where's the escritor?" "Shh!" The Count of Nad Molech held two fingers to his lips as he entered, pulling the door closed behind him. "More quiet. The archive master's nattering about just up the hall." "And why should I care?" the Duke exclaimed, but not so loudly as the first time. "Are we children to hide from that leathery old eunuch?" "If you wanted a meeting that all know about," Eolair asked, settling himself on a stool, "then why are we hiding in a closet?" "It's no closet," the Rimmersman grumbled. "And you know perfectly well why I told you to come here, and why no secret is safe in the inner keep. Where's the Scriter Veligis?" He felt that a closet was no place for the lector's right-hand man. Eolair laughed. Isgrimner did not. He thought the Hernistir man drunk by his flushed face, or at least a little so. He wished he were the same. "I thought it important that we meet somewhere we could talk freely," Isgrimner said, a little defensively. "We have been much seen in deep conversation lately." "No, Isgrimner, it's you that's right." Eolair waved a hand reassuringly. He was dressed for the Lady Day celebrations, playing the part of a respectful outsider, a part which the pagan Hernistiri had learned well. His festival tunic of white was belted 3 times, each belt covered in gold or enameled metals, and his long mane of black hair was pulled behind his head and tied with golden ribbon. "I was only making a joke, and a sad joke it is," he resumed, "when King John's loyal subjects must meet in secret to speak of things which are no treason." Isgrimner moved slowly to the door and jiggled the latch, making sure it had closed. He turned, putting his wide back against the wood, and crossed his arms across his substantial chest. He, too, was dressed for the festivities, in a fine, lightweight blue tunic and hose, but the braids of his beard had already been frayed loose by nervous tugging, and the hose bagged at the knee. Isgrimner hated dressing up. "Well," he growled at last, tilting his head defiantly, "should I speak first, or will you?" "There's no need to worry who will speak first," the Count said. For a moment the flush of Eolair's face, the color on his high, thin cheekbones, reminded the older man of something he had seen once, years ago, a haunting figure glimpsed across 50 yards of Rimmersgard snow. "One of the white foxes, my father called that one." Isgrimner wondered if the old stories were true. Was there really Scythi blood in the Hernistiri noble houses? Eolair ran a hand across his forehead as he continued speaking, blotting away the tiny droplets of sweat, and the momentary likeness was gone. "We have spoken enough to know that things have gone fiercely wrong. What we need to speak on, and what we need privacy to speak on," he waved his hand at the cluttered archive room, a dark nest of paper and parchment lit by a high triangular window, "is what we can do about it, if anything. But that is it. What can be done?" Isgrimner was not yet willing to jump so boldly and to talk that, whatever Eolair might say, had already the faint, sickening tang of treason. "It's this way," he said. "I would be the last to hold Elias to blame for this be-damned weather. I should know, but it's as hot as the devil's breath and dry as a bone here. In my land in the north, we're having a terrible winter. Snows and ice that beat anything remembered. So weather here is no fault of the king's, any more than the roofs collapsed and the cattle frozen in the barn halls in Rimmersgard are mine. He tugged fiercely, and another beard braid raveled loose, the ribbon hanging limply down from the grey tangle. Of course, Elias is to blame for keeping me here while my kinsfolk and people suffer, but that is another line and another hook. No, it's that the man doesn't seem to care. The wells drying up, the farms lying fallow, starving people sleeping in the fields, and the cities are choked with the plague. And he seems not to notice. The taxes and levies go up. Those bedamned ass-licking pups of the nobility has befriended ring him round all day, drinking and singing and fighting, and the old duke grunted in disgust. And the tournaments! Odin's red spear, I was as much for the tourney as any man in my day. But Erkenland is crumbling to dust beneath his father's throne. The countries of the High Ward are restless as a spooked colt, and still the tournaments go on. And the barge parties on the Kinslaw, and the jugglers, and the tumblers, and the bear baitings. It's as bad as what they say of the worst days of Craxus the goat. Red in the face himself now, Isgrimnur balled his fists and stared at the floor. In Hernister, Eolair's voice was soft and musical after the Rimmersman's hoarse tirade, we say a shepherd, not a butcher, meaning a king should preserve his land and people like a flock, taking from them only what he needs to get by, not to use them up until there's nothing left to do but eat what remains. Eolair stared at the small window and the particles of parchment dust that eddied in its diffuse light. That's what Elias is doing, eating his land bite by bite as surely as did the giant Kroitmafreg once devour the mountain at Cranir. He was a good man once, Elias was, Isgrimnur said wonderingly. Far easier to deal with than his brother. Surely not all men are meant for kingship, but it seems more is wrong than just a man made ill by power. Something is damnably wrong, and it is not only Fangbald and Breugar and those that are leading him to the cliff. The Duke had somewhat regained his breath. You know it is that vicious bastard Priorites who fills his head with strange notions and keeps him up nights in that tower with lights and unholy noises, until sometimes it seems that the king does not know where he is when the sun is up. What could Elias want from such a creature as that whoreson priest? He is king of the known world. What could Priorites possibly have to offer him? Eolair stood, still with eyes fixed to the light above, and dampened his sleeve against his forehead. I wish I knew, he said at last. So, what then is there to do? Isgrimnur narrowed his old fierce eyes. What said Escritor Veligus? It is, after all, Mother Church's cathedral, that is, confiscate at St. Sutrin's. It is Duke Leobardus's Nabanai ships, along with your King Luth, that Gutwulf has stolen under the lie of plague danger at the sovereign harbour of Abengate. Leobardus and Lector Renesson are close. They rule Naban like one two-headed monarch. Surely Veligus must have had something to say on his master's behalf. He has much to say, but little of substance, my friend. Eolair slumped back on his stool. The bright shaft of sunlight was diminished now, its source partially blocked as the sun sank, the little room in even denser shadow. Of what Duke Leobardus thinks of this act of piracy, 3 grain ships thieved outright in a Hernister harbour, Veligus professes not to know. On his master's behalf he is, as ever, vague. His sacredness, Renesson, I think, has designs to be a peacemaker, between Elias and Duke Leobardus, and perhaps at the same time improve the position of your Aednite church here at court. My master, King Luth, has directed me next to travel to Naban, and perhaps I will find out the truth of that when I'm there. I fear, however, that if such is the case, the lector has misjudged. If the snubbing that Elias and his sycophants have given Velidius is any indication, the king is more restless even than his father was under Mother Church's broad shadow. So many plots, his Grimner groaned. So many intrigues. It makes my head swim. I am not a man for such things. Give me a sword or an axe. Let me deal blows. Is that why you've taken to closets? Eolair smiled and produced from beneath his cloak a skin of sour honey mead. There does not seem anyone to swing at here. I think you're taking rather well to intrigue late in life, my good Duke. His Grimner frowned and took the offered skin. He's a born intriguer himself, our Eolair, he thought. I should be grateful, if nothing else, to have someone to talk to. For all that Hernestyri poetry talk I've heard him trot out for the ladies, he's hard as shield steel underneath. A good ally for treacherous times. There's something else. His Grimner handed the skin back to Eolair and wiped his mouth. The Count took a long swallow and then nodded his head. Out with it. I'm all ears, like a Kirkhoyle hare. That dead man old Morgenes found out in the Kinswood? As Grimner said. The arrow-shot one? Eolair nodded again. He was mine. Bindesek by name, although by the time he was discovered I would never have known him but for a broken bone in his face that was got in an earlier service for me. Of course I said nothing. Yours? Eolair cocked an eyebrow. And doing what? Do you know? As Grimner laughed, a short barking sound. Certainly. That is why I kept quiet. I sent him out when Skali of Coldstrike took his kinsman and departed north. Sharpnose has been making too many new friends among Elias's court for my liking, so I sent Bindesek out with a message to my son, Izorn. As long as Elias is keeping me here with these ridiculous errands, these shows of mock diplomacy that he claims are so important, and if they were so important, why entrust them to a blunt old war dog like me? Then I wanted Izorn to be on a special close watch. I don't trust Skali any more than I would a starving wolf, and my son has troubles enough at home already from what I hear. All the reports that have trickled down across the Frostmarch are bad. Raging storms in the north, the roads unsafe, villagers forced to huddle together in the main halls. It makes for troubled times, and Skali knows that. Do you think, then, that it was Skali killed your man? Eolair leaned forward, passing the skin back. I don't know, to be sure. The Duke tipped back his head for another long swallow, the muscles in his thick neck pulsing. A thin drizzle of mead spattered down his blue tunic. What I mean is, it's the most obvious thing, but I have many doubts. He wiped at the stain absently for a moment. First of all, even if he caught Bindesek, it's an act of treason to kill him. For all his contempt, Skali is my liegeman, and I am his liege lord. But the body was hidden. Not well. And why so close to the castle? Why not wait until they had reached the Weldhelm Hills, or the Frostmarch Road, if it's even passable, and kill him there where I'd never find out? Also, the arrow doesn't strike me as Skali's way. I could see him chopping Bindesek up in a rage with that great axe of his, but shooting him and then dropping him in the Kinswood, it doesn't sit right somehow. Then who? As Grimner shook his head, feeling the mead at last. "That's what worries me, Hernister man," he said at last. "I just don't know. There are strange things afoot. Travelers' tales, castle rumors." Eolair went to the door and unlatched it, pushing it open to allow fresh air into the small room. "These are indeed strange times, my friend," he said, and took a deep breath. "And perhaps the most important question of all, where in this strange world is Prince Josua?" Simon picked up a small piece of flint and sent it spinning into space. After describing a graceful arc through the morning air, the stone descended with a muffled snap into a leafless topiary animal in the garden below. Crawling to the edge of the chapel roof, Simon marked its impact point like a skilled catapult man, noting the quiver at the haunches of the hedge squirrel. He rolled back from the roof gutter and into the shadow of a chimney, savoring the cool solidity of the stones beneath his spine. Overhead, the fierce eye of the Maris sun glared down, nearing its noon apex. It was a day to evade responsibility, to escape Rachel's chores and Morghenes' explanations. The doctor had not yet found out, or had not mentioned, Simon's thwarted foray into the military arts, and Simon was content to keep it that way. Spread-eagled and squint-eyed in the morning brightness, he heard a faint ticking noise near his head. He opened one eye in time to see a tiny gray shadow whisk past. Rolling slowly over onto his stomach, he scanned the rooftop. The great chapel roof spread before him, a field of humped and irregular slate tiles in whose cracks sprouted tight-coiled hanks of brown and pale green moss that had somehow miraculously survived the drought, clinging to life as grudgingly as they clung to the splintered tiles. The plain of slates marched uphill from the guttered edge to the chapel's dome, which pushed up through the roof like a sea turtle's shell breaching the shallow wavelets of a quiet cove. Seen from this angle, the dome's colorful glass panels, which shone inside the chapel with magical pictures of the lives of saints, looked dark and flat, a parade of crude figures across a dun-colored world. At the dome's apex, an iron knob held aloft a golden tree, but from Simon's viewpoint it was merely gilded, the gold leaf peeling in slender, shimmering strips that revealed the corrosion beneath. Beyond the castle chapel, the sea of roofs spread out in all directions. The great hall, the throne room, the archives and servants' quarters, all pitched and uneven, repaired or replaced many times as the seasons in their passing licked at gray stone and lead shingle, then nibbled them away. To Simon's left loomed the slender white arrogance of Green Angel Tower. Farther back, protruding above the arch of the chapel dome, the gray, squat bulk of Yeldon's tower sat up like a begging dog. As Simon surveyed the expanse of the roof world, a flirt of gray appeared again at the edge of his vision. Turning swiftly, he saw the hindquarters of a small, soot-colored cat disappear into a hole at the roof's edge. He crawled across the slates to investigate. When he was close enough to observe the hole, he dropped back down onto his stomach, balancing his chin on the back of his hands. There was no sign of movement now. A cat on the roof, he thought. Well, someone might as well live up here, besides flies and pigeons. I suppose he eats those scrabbling roof rats. Simon, despite having only seen its tail and back legs thus far, felt a sudden affinity with this outlaw roof cat. Like him, the cat knew the secret passages, the angles and crannies, and went where it would without leave. Like himself, this gray hunter made its way without the concern or charity of others. Even Simon knew that this was a terrible exaggeration of his own situation, but he rather liked the comparison. For example, hadn't he crept unsuspected onto the same rooftop 4 days ago, the day after Elijah Manza, to watch the mustering out of the Erkenguard? Rachel the dragon, irritated by his infatuation with everything except maintenance of the household, which she felt was his true and neglected duty, had earlier forbidden him to go down and join the crowd at the main gate. Reuben the bear, the hump-shouldered, slab-muscled master of the castle smithy, had told Simon that the Erkenguard was going to Falshire, up the river Imstreka to the east of Irchester. The wool merchants' guild there was causing trouble, Reuben had explained to the youth as he dropped a red-hot horseshoe into a bucket of water. Waving away the hissing steam, Reuben had then tried to describe the complicated situation. It seemed that the drought had caused such distress that the sheep of Falshire's farmers, their main livelihood, must now be appropriated by the crown to feed the starving, dispossessed masses crowding into Irchester. The wool merchants, crying that this would ruin them, that they too would be made to starve, were swarming in the Falshire streets, inflaming the local folk against the unpopular edict. So Simon had climbed secretly onto the chapel roof, Tiaz Day last, to watch the Erkenguard ride out. Several hundred well-armed foot soldiers, and a dozen knights under the command of Earl Fengbald, whose fief Falshire was. As Fengbald rode out at the front of the guard, helmed and corseletted, splendid in his red tunic and silver-stitched eagle, several of the more cynical in the watching crowd suggested the Earl was taking so many soldiers for fear that his Falshire subjects would not recognize him, owing to his extended absences. Others suggested he might fear that they would recognize him. Fengbald had not exactly been tireless in the interests of his hereditary domain. Simon thought back warmly on Fengbald's impressive helmet, a gleaming silver casque crested with a pair of spreading wings. Rachel and the others are right, he thought suddenly. Here I am daydreaming again. Fengbald and his noble friends will never know if I live or die. I must make something of myself. I don't want to be a child forever, do I? He scratched at a slate tile with a piece of gravel, trying to draw an eagle. Besides, I would probably look foolish in armor, wouldn't I? The memory of the soldiers of the Erkenguard marching so proudly out the great Nerla gate touched him in sore spots, but it warmed him too. He kicked his feet lazily as he watched the cat's cave for sign of its denizen. It was an hour past noon before a suspicious nose appeared at the front of the hole. By this time, Simon was riding a stallion through the gates of Falshire, flowers raining down from the windows above. Tugged back to attention by the sudden movement, he held his breath as the nose was followed by the rest of the beast, a small, short-furred gray cat with a patch of white running from right eye to chin. The youth stayed stock still as the cat, a mere half a fathom from his own position, took momentary fright at something and arched its back, eyes narrowing. Simon feared it had seen him, but as he remained motionless, it suddenly moved forward, bounding out of the shadow of the roof's curved edge and into the broad path of the sun's passage. As Simon watched, delighted, the gray catling found a loose piece of flint and batted it, skittering across the tiles, following to hook it with an agile paw and begin the game anew. He watched the roof cat's antics for some time until a particularly ridiculous pratfall. The catling had skidded to a stop with both front paws on the slate chip, tumbled head over heels into a crack between the tiles, then lay there with its tail wriggling in exasperation, forced him to reveal his position. His long-suppressed snort of laughter broke forth. The little beast leaped tumbling into the air, landed, and bolted for its hole with no more than a brief glance in Simon's direction. This scrambling exit convulsed him again. "Scatter, cat!" he called after the vanished creature. "Scatter! You catter? Scatter, scatter, catter. As he was crawling toward the hole mouth to sing a little song of shared outlook on roofs and stones and solitude to the gray cat, who he was somehow certain would be listening, something else caught his eye. He put his hands on the roof edge and poked his head up to look. The beginnings of a breeze traced subtle designs through his hair. Away to the southeast, far beyond the limits of Urchester and the headlands above the Kinslaw, a deep gray mark was smeared across the clear Maris sky, as if a dirty thumb had been dragged across a newly painted wall. The wind shredded the dark smudge even as he watched, but darker billows were rising from below, a turbulent darkness too thick for any wind to diffuse. A regular black cloud was mounting upward on the eastern horizon. It took him a long, puzzled moment before he realized that what he was seeing was smoke, a dense plume of it besmirching the pale, clean sky. Falshire was burning. Okay, so we are going to start Chapter 10. Excuse me. Chapter 10, King Hemlock. 2 days later, on the morning of Maris's last day, Simon was going down to breakfast with the other scullions when he was brought up short by a heavy black hand on his shoulder. For an unreal, terrifying moment, his thoughts skipped back to the throne room dream and the ponderous dancing of the Malachite kings. This hand, though, proved to be wearing a cracked, fingerless black glove. Neither was its owner made of dark stone, although, as Simon stared up in surprise at the face of Inch, it did seem that God had somehow neglected to provide enough living stuff while this Inch person was being made, and that last-minute substitutions of some inert, imperturbable matter had been necessary. Inch leaned down until his whiskered face was very close to Simon's. Even his breath seemed to smell more of stone than of wine or onions or anything ordinary. "Doctor wants to see you." He rolled his eyes from side to side. "Right away, like." The other scullions had scattered past Simon and the hulking Inch with curious looks and continued on their way. Simon, trying to squirm out from underneath the weighty hand, watched them go despairingly. "Very well, I'll be right there," he said, and with a wiggle tugged free. "Just let me get a crust of bread that I can eat as I go." He trotted on down the corridor toward the servants' eating room, stealing a backward glance. Inch was still standing in the same place, following his retreat with the tranquil eyes of a bull in a meadow. When he emerged in a short while with a heel of bread and a wedge of chewy white cheese, he was dismayed to find that Inch had waited for him. The large man fell into step alongside as he headed toward Morganace's chambers. Simon offered him some food, trying to smile as he did so, but Inch only stared at it incuriously and said nothing. As they walked across the dry, rutted open ground of the Middle Bailey, threading through the flocks of writing priests making their daily pilgrimages between the chancellery and the Hall of Archives, Inch cleared his throat as if to speak. Simon, who felt so uncomfortable around this person that even silence made him nervous, looked up expectantly. "Why," Inch said at last, "why do you take my place?" He did not turn his waxy eyes away from the priest-clogged pathway before them. It was Simon's heart that now took on the qualities of stone, cold, heavy, and burdensome. He was sorry for this farm animal that thought itself a man, but frightened by him too. "I haven't taken your place." His protestation sounded false even to his own ears. "Doesn't the doctor still have you in to help out with carrying things and setting things up? He is teaching me to do other things that are very different." They walked on in silence. At last Morganius's chambers were in view, crouched in choking ivy like the nest of a small but resourceful beast. When they were perhaps 10 paces away, Inch's hand clutched Simon's shoulder once more. "Before you came," Inch said, his wide, round face moving down toward Simon's like a basket being lowered from an upstairs window. "Before you came, I was his helper. I was going to be next." He frowned, pushing his lower lip out and knitting his single bar of eyebrow into a steeper angle, but his eyes were still mild and sad. "Dr. Inch, I would have been." He focused his gaze on Simon, who half feared he would be crumpled beneath the weight of the paw on his collarbone. "I don't like you, little kitchen boy." Turning him loose, Inch shuffled away, the back of his head barely visible above the mountainous rise of his bowed shoulders. Simon, rubbing his neck, felt a little sick. Morganius was ushering a trio of young priests out of his chambers. They were conspicuously, and somewhat shockingly, as far as Simon was concerned, drunk. "They came for my contribution to the All Fools' Day celebrations," Morganius said as he shut the door behind the trio, who had already burst into ragged song. "Hold this ladder, Simon." A bucket of red paint was perched on the ladder's topmost step, and when the doctor reached it, he fished out a brush that had fallen in and began daubing strange characters above the doorframe. Angular symbols, each one a tiny puzzling picture. They looked to Simon a little like the ancient writings contained in some of Morganius's books. "What are those for?" he asked. The furiously painting doctor did not reply. Simon took his hand off the rung to scratch his ankle, and the ladder began to sway ominously. Morganius had to grasp the door lintel to keep from toppling. "No, no, no," he barked, trying to keep the ebb and flow of the paint from overtopping the bucket's edge. "You know better, Simon. The rule is all questions written out. But wait until I'm down from here. If I fall off and die, there'll be no one to answer you." Morganius went back to his painting, sputtering quietly to himself. "Sorry, Doctor," Simon said, a touch indignantly. "I just forgot." A few moments passed with no other sounds than the whiskery swish of Morganius's brush. "Will I always have to write down my questions? I can't hope to write as fast as I think up things I want to know about." "That," Morganius said, squinting at his last stroke, "was the general idea behind the rule. You, boy, devise questions like God makes flies, and poor people, in droves. I am an old man and prefer to set my own pace." "But," Simon's voice took on a despairing tone, "I shall be writing the rest of my days." "I can think of many less worthwhile ways you might spend your life," Morganius responded, beetling down the ladder. He turned to survey the complete effect, the arch of strange letters all along the top of the doorframe. "For instance," he said, casting a sharp, knowing eye over to Simon, "you might forge a letter and join Breugar's guardsmen, then spend your time having little bits hacked off you by men with swords." "Curses," thought Simon, "caught like a rat." "So you heard, did you?" he asked at last. The doctor nodded, retaining his tight, angry smile. "Sire, he saved me, but he has such eyes," Simon thought, "like needles. He has a stare worse than Rachel's dragon voice." The doctor continued to watch him. Simon's gaze dropped to the floor. At last, in a sullen voice that sounded years younger than he would have preferred, Simon said it. "I'm sorry." Now the doctor, as if a restraining cord had been cut, began to pace. "If I'd had any idea of what you were going to use that letter for," he fumed. "What were you thinking of? And why did you feel you had to lie to me?" Somewhere deep inside, a part of Simon was pleased to see the doctor upset, a part that enjoyed the attention. Another part, however, felt ashamed. Somewhere else inside him, how many Simons were there, was a calm, interested observer who wanted to see which part would speak for all. Morganase's pacing was beginning to make him nervous. "Besides," he called to the old man, "why should you care? It's my life, isn't it? A kitchen boy's stupid life. They didn't want me anyway," he finished in a mutter. "And you should be grateful," Morganase said sharply. "Grateful that they don't want you. What kind of life is it? Sitting around the barracks playing dice with know-nothing louts during time of peace, getting hacked, arrow-pierced, and stallion-stamped in time of war. You don't know, you stupid boy. To be a simple kern while all these high-living, peasant-cudgeling knights are on the battlefield is no better than being a shuttlecock at the Ladies' Day games." He whirled to face Simon. "Do you know what Fengbald and his knights did at Falshire?" The youth did not answer. "They put the entire wool district to the torch. That's what they did. Burned women and children along with the rest, just because they didn't want to give up their sheep. Fengbald had the sheep-dipping vats filled with hot oil and scalded the leaders of the Wool Merchants Guild to death. 600 of Earl Fengbald's own subjects slaughtered, and he and his men marched back to the castle singing. And this is the company you wish to join?" Simon was truly angry now. He felt his face getting hot and was terrified that he might burst into tears. The dispassionate observer Simon had disappeared entirely. "So," he shouted, "what does it matter to anyone?" Morganase's apparent surprise at this unusual outburst made him feel worse. "What is to become of me?" he asked, and slapped at his thighs in frustration. "There is no glory in the scullery, no glory among chambermaids, no glory here in a dark room filled with stupid books." The hurt look on the old man's face burst the straining dikes at last. Simon fled in tears to the far part of the doctor's chamber, to huddle sobbing on the sea chest, his face pressed against the cold stone wall. Outside, somewhere, the 3 young priests were singing hymns in distracted, drunken harmony. The little doctor was at his side in a moment, patting with an awkward hand at the youth's shoulder. "Now, boy, now," he said bewilderedly, "what is all this talk of glory? Have you caught the sickness too? Curse me for a blind beggar, I should have seen. This fever has cankered even your simple heart, hasn't it? Simon, I'm sorry. It takes a strong will or practiced eye to see through the glitter to the rotten core." He patted Simon's arm again. Simon had no idea what the doctor was talking about, but the tone of Morganase's voice was soothing. Despite himself, he felt his anger begin to slip away, but the feeling of what seemed like weakness that followed made him sit up and shake off the doctor's hand. He wiped his wet face roughly with his jerkin sleeve. "I don't know why you're sorry, Doctor," he began, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "I am sorry for acting like a child." He stood up, and the little man's eyes followed him as he crossed the room to the long table, where he stood, drawing a finger across a scatter of open books. I lied to you, and I've made a fool of myself," he said, not looking up. "Please forgive the stupidity of a kitchen boy, Doctor. A kitchen boy who thought he could be more than that." In the silence that followed this brave speech, Simon heard Morganase make a strange sound. Was he actually crying? But a moment later, it became all too clear. Morgenes was chuckling. No, laughing, trying to muffle it behind his billowing sleeve. Simon whirled, ears burning like coals. Morgenes caught his eye for a moment, then looked away, shoulders heaving. Oh, lad. Oh, lad. He wheezed at last, putting a restraining hand out toward the outraged Simon. Don't go. Don't be angry. You would be wasted on the field of battle. You should be a great lord and win victories at treaty table that always outweigh the victories of the field, or an escritor of the church and wheedle the eternal souls of the rich and dissolute. And that's where I'm going to stop right now. All righty. So with that, I am going to wrap it up for the evening and go and find out what other strange and disastrous things have happened while I've been reading. Again, I thank you for facilitating my doing it an hour earlier, even though fate conspired to crush my dreams. But as I said, I think everything should be normal next week, which means we will be continuing from that passage there at 1 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and then again at the 7 o'clock Sunday evening Pacific Daylight Time slot. And at that point, or either of those points, I ask you to join me if you are available. It is always a pleasure. So again, thank you so much. Take good care of yourself and others. Keep being safe. That's super important, as we can see. Our family's been extra safe because of various health problems, and it hasn't kept us from getting it in the family. So y'all be good. Y'all take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. I will see you very soon. Thank you for joining me. Peace and good night.